The Rock Hudson house in Beverly Hills had stood like a sentinel on the hill for decades, watching the city evolve. Its modernist architecture gleamed under the California sun, while the sprawling garden bloomed with memories of the golden age of Hollywood. Now, a new family lived there, weaving their own tale into the home's history. The Delacroix family: Sebastian, a renowned jazz pianist; Marie, a perfumer; and their precocious 10-year-old daughter, Lila, had moved in just a few months earlier. They were drawn to the house not by its celebrity past but by its soul. From the moment they entered, they felt the whispers of its former owner. The living room seemed to hum with the echo of an old jazz melody, faint yet unmistakable. Sebastian was the first to notice it. He would sit at the grand piano in the corner, letting his fingers wander across the keys. Without fail, the melody would surface, as if the house were gently guiding him. "Do you hear that?" he asked Marie one evening as she came in, the scent of fresh jasmine trailing behind her. Marie tilted her head. "It's like a conversation between the walls and your piano." Sebastian nodded. "It feels like an invitation." Marie was attuned to the house in her own way. Her work as a perfumer required her to notice subtle nuances, and the house was alive with scents. In the mornings, she caught a faint aroma of cigars in the office. It wasn't overpowering but warm, like a memory lingering in the air. She started blending fragrances inspired by the house notes of cedar, leather, and a whisper of tobacco. Lila, however, had the most unusual connection to the house. She claimed to have a friend there. "His name is Mr. Rock," she announced one evening at dinner. Sebastian and Marie exchanged a glance. "Mr. Rock?" Sebastian asked. Lila nodded, her curls bouncing. "He's very kind. He says he likes the way you play piano, Papa. And he likes Mama's perfumes." Marie chuckled nervously. "That's sweet, darling. What else does Mr. Rock say?" Lila grinned. "He says the house is happy we're here. It hasn't felt this alive in a long time." That night, after Lila went to bed, Sebastian and Marie stayed up late, talking about the peculiar energy in the house. They didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but there was no denying that the house had a presence. One evening, as Sebastian played his piano, the melody took on a life of its own. The notes seemed to shimmer in the air, and Marie, sitting nearby with a notebook, caught a sudden burst of inspiration for a new perfume. She jotted down the idea as if it had been whispered to her. Lila came running in, her sketchpad in hand. "Look, Mr. Rock showed me this." She held up a drawing of a grand party, people in elegant attire swirling around the living room, glasses of champagne in hand. Sebastian and Marie stared. The drawing was eerily accurate, down to the piano's placement and the garden visible through the windows. "Where did you see this, Lila?" Marie asked. Lila shrugged. "Mr. Rock showed me. He said it was his favorite memory." From that night on, the Delacroix family embraced the magic of the house. Sebastian composed an album inspired by the mysterious jazz melody. Marie launched a fragrance line called Echoes of Beverly, with scents that captured the spirit of the house. And Lila, with her vivid imagination and connection to Mr. Rock, became the family historian, weaving stories of the house's past into her art. The house thrived under their care, alive with music, creativity, and laughter. And somewhere in its walls, the spirit of Rock Hudson smiled, grateful that his home was once again filled with life. The Delacroix family had settled into the rhythms of the house, each member finding their own connection to its enigmatic energy. But as the days turned into months, the house began to reveal itself in new, unexpected ways. One night, Sebastian stayed up late in the office, working on a piece of music. The cigar aroma was stronger than usual, almost tangible. As he leaned back in the leather chair, the jazz melody drifted to him, but this time it was more complex, layered. He reached for his notebook to jot down the notes, but the pencil slipped from his hand. When he bent down to retrieve it, he noticed something peculiar. A faint groove in the floorboards, just under the desk. Curious, he traced the groove with his fingers and felt a slight give. The panel shifted, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a slim, leather-bound journal. Sebastian opened it, and his breath caught. The pages were filled with elegant handwriting, dated from the late 1950s. The entries spoke of glamorous parties, fleeting romances, and a yearning for something deeper. There was no name in the journal, but it didn't need one. The voice was unmistakable. It was Rock Hudson. As Sebastian read, he felt an odd sensation, as if the words were meant for him. One entry in particular stood out. The music is the only place I can truly lose myself, where I feel whole. Whoever finds this, I hope they understand. My house was never just a place. It was my refuge, my heart. If you're reading this, take care of it. Listen to its voice. Sebastian closed the journal, his mind racing. He didn't tell Marie or Lila right away. He wanted to understand what the house was trying to say before he shared it. Meanwhile, Marie began to experience something strange as well. One afternoon, while blending a new fragrance, she caught a scent she hadn't created, a faint, powdery floral note with a hint of musk. It was unfamiliar yet oddly comforting. When she tried to replicate it, the scent vanished, as if it had never been there. "Do you smell that?" she asked Lila, who was drawing at the kitchen table. Lila sniffed the air and smiled. "It's Mr. Rock's friend." Marie frowned. "Friend?" Lila nodded. "He says she used to live here too, but she doesn't talk as much. She just watches." Marie felt a chill but didn't press further. Lila's friend had always seemed harmless, but now Marie couldn't shake the feeling that the house was more crowded than they realized. That evening, the family sat in the garden, enjoying the cool breeze. Lila brought out her sketchpad and began to draw. When she finished, she held it up proudly. "Look, it's the piano room." The drawing was intricate, more detailed than anything a 10-year-old should have been able to create. In the corner of the room stood a man in a sharp suit, his face shadowed but unmistakably smiling. Beside him was a woman in a flowing gown, her hand resting gently on his arm. "Who are they, Lila?" Sebastian asked, his voice tinged with unease. Lila shrugged. "Just Mr. Rock and his friend." Marie and Sebastian exchanged a glance, their unease growing. Later that night, as they lay in bed, the sound of distant laughter echoed through the house. It wasn't intrusive, just faint enough to make them wonder if they'd imagined it. But when Marie got up to check on Lila, she found the girl fast asleep, her sketchpad resting on the nightstand. On the pad was a new drawing, one Lila hadn't shown them. It was of the garden, illuminated by moonlight. A figure stood under the archway watching the house. The face was obscured, but the posture was unmistakably familiar, as if the person belonged there, yet didn't want to be seen. The house, it seemed, wasn't done revealing its secrets. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The next morning, the Delacroix family awoke to an odd discovery. In the garden, beneath the archway from Lila's sketch, lay a single white rose. Its petals glistened with dew despite the dry night. Marie picked it up and held it to her nose, recognizing the same elusive floral note she'd been chasing in her blends. "Did you put this here?" she asked Sebastian. He shook his head, his brow furrowed. "No. Maybe Lila?" But when they asked Lila, she simply smiled. "It's for you, Mama." From her, Marie's heart skipped. "From who? Sweetheart?" Lila shrugged, unconcerned. "The lady. She says thank you for listening." Listening? To what? The rose became the first of many signs that the house was alive in ways they couldn't explain. Over the following weeks, small, inexplicable things began to happen. Marie's perfumes began to sell out as if enchanted, each one resonating deeply with buyers who claimed they felt a sense of nostalgia they couldn't place. Sebastian's compositions grew richer, more layered, as if the melodies pouring from him weren't entirely his own. But it was Lila who experienced the most profound changes. She began waking up in the middle of the night, her eyes bright and alert. "They want to show me something," she told her parents one morning, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Marie and Sebastian were concerned but hesitant to dismiss Lila's experiences. They agreed to let her keep a notebook by her bed to record what she saw. That night, they heard her soft footsteps moving through the house. Marie followed her, careful not to disturb her daughter's trance-like state. Lila wandered to the office, the same room where Sebastian had found the hidden journal. She paused in front of the bookcase, her small hands grazing the spines of the books. Then, without hesitation, she pulled out a volume of poetry. A faint click echoed in the room, and the bookcase swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Marie's breath caught in her throat. "Sebastian," she whispered, her voice shaking. He came running, and together they followed Lila into the hidden corridor. The air inside was cool and heavy, carrying the scent of aged wood and something faintly sweet, roses, perhaps. At the end of the passage was a small, circular room. It was sparsely furnished, with a single chair, a low table, and a dusty phonograph. On the table sat a stack of vinyl records, their edges worn. Lila walked straight to them, her fingers gliding over the labels. She picked one and placed it on the phonograph. As the needle touched the record, a hauntingly beautiful jazz melody filled the room. It was the same melody that had haunted Sebastian since they'd moved in, but now it was complete, layered with subtle harmonies and a soulful saxophone. Sebastian stared at the record, his hands trembling. This is the song I've been hearing. But how? Marie turned to Lila. "Who brought you here, sweetheart?" Lila tilted her head, her eyes unfocused. "They say you're ready to see, but only if you keep listening." Before they could ask her what she meant, the record skipped, the melody twisting into something dissonant and sharp. Lila clutched her head, crying out in pain. Marie scooped her up, and Sebastian stopped the record. The silence that followed was deafening, and the room seemed to grow colder. As they carried Lila back to her bed, Sebastian glanced back at the phonograph. The needle had lifted itself, hovering above the record as if waiting. That night none of them slept. Lila muttered in her dreams, her words fragmented but eerily clear. The rose, the melody, not safe yet, still waiting. The next morning, Sebastian and Marie returned to the secret room, but the passage was gone. The bookcase was solid, the poetry volume back in its place. "Did we imagine it?" Marie whispered, clutching Sebastian's arm. He shook his head, his jaw tight. "No, we didn't." In the days that followed, the house grew quieter, almost watchful. The Delacroix family continued their lives, but the sense of mystery deepened. The melodies, the fragrances, the drawings, they were all pieces of a puzzle they didn't yet understand. And somewhere, hidden within the house, a truth lay waiting, ready to be discovered. But at what cost? The days stretched into weeks, and the house seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The strange occurrences slowed but didn't stop. Lila still spoke of Mr. Rock and his friend, though she now mentioned them less frequently, as if they'd stepped back into the shadows. Sebastian couldn't shake the memory of the hidden room, the haunting melody still echoing in his mind. He tried to recreate it on the piano, but the notes never came out quite right. Frustrated, he started leaving a tape recorder running during his late-night sessions, hoping to catch something that his ears might miss. One night, as he played, he thought he heard faint laughter, soft and melodic, blending seamlessly with the music. When he rewound the tape, the laughter wasn't there, but something else was. A voice, low and velvety, whispered over the notes, "You're close, but you're not ready." Sebastian's hands froze. The tape recorder clicked off, the room falling into silence. He stared at the machine, his pulse racing. He rewound the tape and played it again. This time, the voice was gone, leaving only his piano playing. The next morning, he shared the experience with Marie, who had been growing more restless. Her fragrances were selling better than ever, but they felt hollow, as if she were merely replicating something she didn't fully understand. "Do you think the house is testing us?" she asked. Sebastian hesitated. Testing us for what? Marie didn't have an answer. Lila, however, seemed unbothered by their unease. One afternoon, she sat on the floor of the living room, drawing intently. When she finally looked up, she handed the sketch to her parents. It was the secret room again, drawn from a new angle. This time, the phonograph was gone, replaced by an old trunk. Beside it stood a man and a woman, their faces obscured. But what caught Marie's eye was the mirror hanging on the wall behind them. It was cracked, its surface shimmering as though something lurked just beyond it. "Where did you see this, Lila?" Marie asked, her voice tight. Lila shrugged. "I didn't. They showed me." Sebastian studied the drawing, his fingers tracing the lines. "This mirror, we haven't seen it before. Do you think it's?" Marie nodded. "It has to be here somewhere." That evening, they began searching the house, combing through every room, every hidden corner. Hours passed and they found nothing. It wasn't until Sebastian returned to the office that he noticed something he'd overlooked before. The large mirror above the fireplace, usually polished to a shine, was faintly fogged, though the air was warm and dry. He leaned closer and saw what appeared to be words etched faintly into the glass. Marie joined him, her breath catching as she read aloud, "Look beyond the frame." Sebastian ran his fingers along the edges of the mirror and found a latch cleverly hidden beneath the ornate frame. With a soft click, the mirror swung outward like a door, revealing another passageway. This one was narrower than the first, the walls lined with shelves filled with objects. Old photographs, letters, trinkets. At the end of the corridor was a single, large trunk, identical to the one in Lila's drawing. Marie reached for the lid, her hands trembling. It opened easily, the hinges creaking softly. Inside were dozens of items, each wrapped carefully in aged cloth. The first thing she unwrapped was a delicate pocket watch, its face cracked but still ticking. Next was a black and white photograph of a man and woman standing in front of the house. The man's face was unmistakable, Rock Hudson. The woman's was partially obscured, but her hand rested on his shoulder with an intimacy that suggested a deep bond. Sebastian pulled out a small envelope, sealed with wax. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an inscription. "The melody binds us. The house remembers. Find what was left behind." The air in the corridor grew colder, and the faint sound of jazz drifted in, not from the phonograph but from somewhere deeper within the house. Marie and Sebastian exchanged a look. "What was left behind?" Marie whispered. Before Sebastian could respond, a soft thud echoed from somewhere behind them. They turned to see Lila standing in the doorway, her eyes wide. "They want you to finish what they couldn't," she said simply. "But they can't show you everything. You have to find it on your own." "What do we need to find, Lila?" Sebastian asked, his voice tight with urgency. Lila tilted her head, her gaze distant. "The truth. But you have to be careful. Some truths don't want to be found." And then, as if a curtain had dropped, she blinked and looked at them with her usual bright-eyed innocence. "Can I have a snack?" The trunk remained open, its contents waiting. Somewhere in the house, the melody swelled, its notes growing darker. The Delacroix family was on the cusp of uncovering something buried deep in the past, a secret the house had guarded for decades. But what would it cost them to unravel it? The Delacroix family stood at the precipice of a mystery that refused to remain hidden. The house was alive with an energy that seemed to pull them deeper, urging them to uncover its secrets. Sebastian and Marie exchanged uneasy glances as Lila sat on the floor nearby, humming the haunting melody under her breath, oblivious to the tension. Determined to unravel the truth, they spent the following days piecing together the items from the trunk. Each object seemed significant, yet incomplete, like fragments of a story waiting to be told. The photograph, the pocket watch, the journal all pointed to an untold chapter in the life of Rock Hudson. One evening, as they worked late in the office, the house seemed to stir. The faint aroma of cigars filled the air, and the jazz melody played once again, louder this time. But it wasn't just music. It was a message. Sebastian suddenly stood, his eyes alight. "The melody, it's guiding us." He rushed to the piano and began playing the notes he'd heard so many times. As his fingers moved over the keys, the house seemed to respond. The lights flickered, and the walls reverberated with a deep, resonant hum. Marie gasped. "The office!" They hurried to the office, where the mirror above the fireplace, now open like a door, revealed a soft glow emanating from the passage beyond. Lila, wide awake and unusually serious, joined them without a word. They entered the hidden corridor again, the glow intensifying as they approached the trunk. But this time, it wasn't just the items inside that demanded attention. The wall behind the trunk shimmered faintly, like ripples on water. Sebastian hesitated. "What is this?" Lila stepped forward, placing her hand on the shimmering surface. It pulsed, and a faint image appeared. A woman in a flowing gown, her face now clear. She looked familiar, though none of them could place her. Beside her stood Rock Hudson, his arm around her shoulders. The woman's voice, soft and melodic, seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You've come so far. Now finish it." The wall rippled again, revealing a final item, a small, ornate music box. Lila reached for it, her expression calm and sure. When she opened the box, the haunting melody spilled out. But this time it was whole, layered with harmonies and voices that had been missing before. The room trembled, and the vision of the couple became clearer. Marie clutched Sebastian's arm. "That's her. The woman in the scent, the one I've been chasing." The woman smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You've given us a voice again. Now, let us rest." As the melody reached its crescendo, the glow intensified, and the image of the couple faded, leaving behind only the music box and the faint scent of roses. The house grew still, the air lighter, as though it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for decades. In the days that followed, the Delacroix family noticed subtle changes. The strange occurrences stopped, but the house felt warmer, more welcoming. Lila no longer spoke of Mr. Rock or his friend, and the melody ceased to haunt Sebastian's piano. Marie's perfumes took on a new depth, infused with the essence of the house's mystery, and Sebastian's compositions soared to new heights, resonating with audiences around the world. As for Lila, she continued to draw, her sketches now filled with light and joy. She no longer saw figures in the shadows or whispered truths from the past, but sometimes, late at night, she would hum the melody softly, as if to herself. The Delacroix family had given the house what it needed: closure, and in return, it had given them inspiration, connection, and a sense of belonging they hadn't known they were missing. The Rock Hudson house stood tall on its hill, its secrets finally at peace. Yet, when the breeze passed through its halls, it carried a faint, familiar tune, as if the house was still humming its gratitude, forever alive with the echoes of the lives it had held. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.